This isn't the video that I planned to make. Originally, I was gnawing on another Let's Write Adventure style video where I wrote a playable mystery using all of the techniques that I discussed in my video on writing mystery adventures, but then something changed. You see, I have a campaign that I've been running for my friend group since 2020. 4 years of playing every other week, and we've covered so much ground, but our lives have changed also. We don't all live within 15 minutes of each other anymore, and over the last 6 months, scheduling has become something of a bear. So, we made a decision to move to an open table format, where instead of each session being an ongoing chain of events that form a long running, sweeping narrative, our sessions will become more episodic in structure, still connected by an ever evolving story, but segmented into discrete parts. Now, I, for one, am so excited by this because it means we're going to get to play more consistently without stressing if someone can't make an individual session. But it also means that I, as the DM, have got some work to do. So I thought that instead of treating you to a procession of sterile examples of how to go about world building and adventure writing, I'd invite you all into my process as I start a new chapter in a campaign that is very near and dear to my heart. So today, let's start at the beginning. Every open table campaign needs a home base, so let's make one. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of making a home base, I should probably give you a little bit of background so that my choices make more sense. This campaign is set very loosely in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting. We use that Pantheon and several of the landmark locations, but much of what we play is homebrew heavy. As such, in a previous arc, the characters journeyed from Candlekeep to Sigil in search of the wizard's missing mentor. Now, Planescape Adventures of the Multiverse was not yet on the shelves when I wrote this adventure, and even if it was, I don't know if I would have used it. I didn't find a lot of the existing lore on Sigil to be particularly inspiring, but I did love the idea of a donut shaped city at the nexus of the multiverse and the mostly absent inscrutable godhead figure who rules over it. So I kept those two elements and tossed out the rest when I started making my own version of Sigil, City of Doors. And it's that same homebrew version of Sigil that I'll use as the foundation of the home base for my open table campaign for two reasons. One, it already exists in my campaign, so I have some material to build on. And two, it's easy to get anywhere in the multiverse from there. You see, in getting my characters from Candlekeep to Sigil, I introduced the idea of a Dragoman's Key. A key that, when used to open any door, opens instead a portal to a specific locale somewhere in the multiverse. And that kind of access makes this a really appealing home base for an open table campaign, because open table adventures must start and end at the same place so that the characters are already there when the next session starts to avoid continuity gaps. Thus, a home base offering the widest possible access to adventuring sites also means you have the most options for future adventures. So we're going to be building out my own homebrew version of Sigil from the scraps that I already have, and with that in mind, let's begin. So when I previously used Sigil, I used it as part of a kidnapping mystery adventure that I wrote where my players were having to hunt around for one of their missing mentors. So I really only built the parts of the city that were relevant to that mystery, specifically the various investigative scenes where the players would go and discover clues leading them closer to the solution. So I created this very simple map in Wonderdraft that's really just kind of a point crawl style thing where we just have these very specific nodes and then a general contour of the city itself so that I could more easily narrate kind of the experience that the characters were having as they navigated this city. But if I'm going to turn this into a home base for an open table campaign, I'm going to need to build it out quite a bit. One of the things that I'm going to have to do eventually is make a new map for this that is filled out with more points of interest and marks off districts and yada, yada, yada. That'll be a task for another day. First, I want to decide what's going to go into that map, what exists in this city. As I said previously, I'm not using Sigil as it exists in the lore. Don't get me wrong, if you like that, it's cool. There's a lot of cool stuff about Planescape. I just didn't find it very inspiring, and so I wanted to make my own version of it. So I'm going to keep moving along in that vein, and I'm going to start by creating a couple key features in my notes so that I have this viable city that is easy to run and feels more vibrant. So I'm going to start by creating a number of districts within my city. You can call these whatever you want: districts, wards, quarters, anything. But effectively, these are discrete sections of the city that have their own feel and their own atmosphere, and their own specific services and landmarks, etc. So I'll build all that out, including some district-specific encounters that are there more for atmosphere rather than like a combat encounter or a random encounter. They're really there to kind of set the mood and add some variability to the environment. I'll outline major routes throughout the city, specific thoroughfares and roads that I'll work into the map later. And then I'll talk about scenic encounters. These are going to be general encounters that are universal to the city. Now, one of the reasons I like using this districts model is because it's so scalable, right? So, depending on how large of a settlement I'm creating, that just determines how many districts I use. So, for a village, I might use one district. For town, I might use two or three. A city could be, four, five, six, or even more. In this case, this is a pretty big, densely populated area in my mind. So, I'll probably use somewhere between, I don't know, 8 or 10, 10 or 12. Uh, we'll see how it kind of fleshes out as I work through the process. But for today, instead of having you sit here with me while I brainstorm my way through, up to 12 different districts, we're just going to talk about the practice of one of them. And I've gone ahead and prepared one of those. And so we're going to talk about each of the sections because really it is just kind of a rinse and repeat and doing the same process for each district until you have populated out the size of the settlement that you want. So first things first when I'm doing this sort of thing is I'm always, no matter what creative element I'm doing, whatever I'm working on, I start with what I know. I start with the things that are fixed in my mind about this place or that piece. And since my players have already been here, some things are kind of set in stone. We have these specific regions and landmarks to deal with. So we've got some areas that already kind of leap out as specific districts and other places that leap out as specific landmarks. For example, Heichel Street and Tamora Park and Hawker's Hollow are very clearly in my mind districts. We will expand them out as I go through this, and give them their own unique character. Whereas things like Portside, the Dragoman's Guild Hall, Doorkeeper's Tower, these are all kind of landmarks. Same thing for Gibbers and the White Citadel that will become parts of districts. So to illustrate that point, I have gone ahead and built out the um, the elements um, of this central district here, right? So Sigil is built on the inside of what is effectively a donut shape, right? And so I thought that this central point would be kind of the entry and access point in terms of my idea of this city and of its districts. So I'm so I built this out and I call this particular district the Nexus. So I named it, and then I started by giving it just kind of a quick description of what I was looking for. Just a couple sentences to kind of outline it very loosely in my mind. And so I settled on the Nexus serves as Sigil's port of entry. There's only two ways in and out. uh, of the city. One is via Spelljammer port, which I established in the previous adventure, and then one through a Dragoman's Door, which is this concept that I came up with where um, mostly through Doorkeeper's Tower, there's a number of these rooms where it's really just a door. And if you have a Dragoman's key, you can put it in the door, you can open it up, and you can go to wherever that key takes you in the multiverse, with each key being keyed, if you will, to a specific location elsewhere. And then with the Dragoman's Guide Guild here, next door, sort of closely associated with that. But that both methods are housed here in Nexus exclusively, meaning that if you want to get in and out of Sigil, you've got to go through Nexus. Uh, or at least most of the time you should have to go through Nexus. As such, this section of the city is constantly awash with new faces of every socioeconomic group. And that was kind of my idea, was that this is your sort of your port of call, if you will. And so it's a constant, there's kind of a constant churn of people here coming and going from Sigil. Uh, because we're taking our slice out of the middle here, we already have 3 specific landmarks. And for any district, I like to include at least 3 landmarks. Landmarks are good navigational aids for your characters. It helps give them kind of a helps them kind of ground themselves in where they are in the map a little more concretely. But they also help you narrate, sort of travel through the city. So when you're going from point A to point B, for example, if somebody was traveling from Tamora Park up to Givers, I could, narrate them passing the Spelljammer Spire docks and Portside, and and what have you, and whatever else ends up being kind of in between here, to give them this sense of the direction that they're walking and make travel feel more than just a like, okay, well, you were here and now you're over here, because that's just not narratively satisfying. So with that, I went over, or I should say went through, and built out just a couple little details about each of these. Doorkeeper's Tower, I already had built out on my notes because it existed in the previous adventure, but I just gave myself just the quick landmark log line for it here, right? Like I didn't go into a whole lot of detail about it, but more about its appearance, so that when I am narrating through this, I can have that little sentence to pull from. Same thing for Dragoman's Guild Hall, which is this is a Dragoman is a guide effectively, and so this is the guides who you can hire them to either guide you around the city, or you can hire them to guide you elsewhere in the multiverse. And again, I just described the building itself as a landmark, since these are important structures in this district. Now, not all landmarks are going to be buildings in other districts. Some of them will be monuments or parks or, graveyards or what have you. But in this particular instance, they all ended up being buildings that were already involved in our previous adventure. So did the same kind of thing for Portside here, where I talked about it's a series of tall spires that serve as Spelljammer docks, and they encircle an enormous accordion doored portal that leads out into wild space. And effectively, the portal is in between the spires here. The door opens, a Spelljammer comes through, and it has to reorient itself so that it's now perpendicular to one of the planes here and mount on one of the spire docks. And so just did that very quickly, made some very quick structural notes for myself. And then I dug into services. Now, services are the things that your characters can really interact with in a particular district, which is not to say that there won't be things like adventures and stuff like that, but that's a whole different area. That's a whole different segment of this. Right now, we're just building out this background city, this vibrant place where the players can start their adventures, leave, go on adventures, come back to you, or perhaps have adventures in the city. But this is just the environment. We're just trying to bring that alive a little bit by also knowing what can be purchased where the characters need to go to acquire certain things. And so I listed out 6 general groups, as part of my general template for the district, with spaces for bullet points for three different options within each group within each district. Don't necessarily need all of that for every single district. Part of the reason, though, I wanted to illustrate the Nexus is because it has a lot of the stuff. Since it is a port, for all intents and purposes, it has hotels and inns. It has access to food and drink. It has some shopping. It has some sort of few specialty things, a little bit of entertainment, not a ton of it, and some access to things like healing and arcane services because of the other services that are in that area. So it just gave me an opportunity to talk about each one of these points. But when I'm doing something like building out, for example, you know, Heichel Street is in my mind predominantly a an arcane university and healing university kind of area there. There's a lot of healers, there's a lot of wizards, a lot of spellcraft in that region. What there probably isn't a lot of is there's probably not like a ton of entertainment options out there. It's more of a school and business kind of thing there. Whereas stuff like Tamora Park is far more entertainment focused, and there'll be other options for that. Not as many, healing and arcane services and that kind of stuff. So as you're working through your districts and as I work through districts on this, there will be a different blend of these things for each one of them. That being said, I'm not trying to outline all of the options for every single service in here. For example, I'm not trying to outline every hotel and inn that exists within this particular district. Just some keystone ones that are different enough that they offer the players viable options. So, for example, for the inns and hotels, I crafted two of them. One is Doorkeeper's Tower, because I've already established that it effectively is a luxury hotel where, again, you can travel in and out of Sigil through, but it has rooms that cover everything from modest to royal quality. And it has a really helpful concierge service there where you can effectively pay and get access to near encyclopedic knowledge of Sigil. So a good place to go if the characters are trying to figure out where they need to go in Sigil, where, how they find a certain thing or where they might look for something, or just learn about the different districts. But on the flip side of that, since that's such a high-end place, I wanted to make a something that was on the lower end, something that was cheaper, that was a little more streamlined in its services. And so I created the Hearthfire Inn. And this didn't exist in my previous adventure. I came up with this while building this district, where this is a cheap flop house between Dragoman's, Guildhall, and Portside, and it's run by the Lamplighters, which are a faction that, again, I had kind of thought about previously, but they never showed up in the previous adventure. But that the Lamplighters offer rooms of poor quality here, and and they have a whole bunch of these little Hearthfire inns dotted throughout the city. So we have two distinct options here, which is what we want. We might have a third if it fit the area here, but it didn't really feel like it fit the Nexus to have three options or a middle of the road option. But we want them to be distinct. What we don't want is two options that are practically identical, because if the players just flip a coin, then it's not a real choice, and you might as well have just made one of them. So for things like food and drink, it's the same sort of approach where you're creating just a few keystone touch points, a few places that you might point to the characters when they say, "Oh, yeah, we go searching for a tavern." You can say things like, "Okay, well, do you look for, high end, a dive bar or somewhere that's kind of in the middle?" And now we have places that we can funnel them towards, or maybe they, are looking for a specific atmosphere, and we have a little bit of information on that. Again, I'm not trying to build these out to be fully rendered. I'm really just giving myself a couple sentences. You'll notice that most of these are a sentence, maybe two. And that's really all that I want because who knows if the players are going to go to any of these. So there's no reason to flesh it out until we need to in a lot of circumstances here, until it becomes relevant as part of an adventure or some place that the characters want to go. Before we carry on, are you looking for fun, exciting adventures that you can drop into your campaign with ease? If so, check out my published adventures. They're the perfect solution when you need a kickstart for your campaign, a quick adventure to get you through tonight's session, or even just a weekend one-shot. Go to rjkerr.com to find all my content. Thanks for listening, and now back to the video. Now, just because you have an option for something doesn't mean that it needs to conform to the typical choices that we might associate with that particular area of service. So, for example, I you know a, a place like the Nexus where people are traveling in. Yes, I wanted there to be maybe some options to purchase things, but that felt more like it would be a lot of kind of trinkets and um, you know souvenirs and that sort of thing that 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 might be the shopping options aimed at most people moving through the area. But because this is primarily a a place where people are coming for a reason, and we have this Spelljammer port there, I thought it made more sense that the major shopping options here would be more about wholesale outfitting crews and giving Spelljammers, filling them with supplies and replacement parts and that kind of thing. And so instead of creating sort of a couple general stores, I created two stores that are wholesalers. And so, for example, we have Rumble Chest, Wild Space Outfitters, a wholesale adventuring goods distributor for outfitting Spelljammers. They sell all mundane adventuring gear from the player's handbook, except weapons and armor, but only in quantities of 10 or more, so they have to buy it as part of a larger batch. Now, I distinguished that from the other one, this Dur Dummelier's discount suppliers, by saying that it has everything the Rumble Chest does and at a 10% discount. But there's a 25% chance that anything purchased there is broken and they don't offer refunds. And so, again, we have two similar options, but they're just different enough that the players have a serious choice to make if they want to buy stuff here. One, they're going to need quantity if they're going to purchase their main gear here. But two, they have an option between paying a little more and getting something new that they know works, or gambling and going for a discount and getting something that might break. That being said, if they just are looking for personal gear, now there's a reason for them to go somewhere else in the city. Because we don't want to create districts that are self-contained cities all in of themselves. We want there to be a reason for the players to go explore and get out into other parts of the city. And so, there's nothing wrong with putting all of these services in a particular area, but make sure that they're not going to meet every single need the players might ever have. Sure, many of their general needs, but there should be reasons for them to go elsewhere. For example, Hawker's Hollow is a shopping district, lots of stores in there. And so if I sell everything up at Nexus, there's no reason for them to go to Hawker's Hollow. I really want them to have a reason to go to Hawker's Hollow, because maybe there's something important there. Maybe there's something that they might find, or adventures that they can engage with that will make the game more interesting for them and give them a little more agency to explore and find things on their own. To that end, not every game needs healing and arcane services. I built this particular adventure when I wrote it originally to be a little more wild, to be a little more madcap, to have access to strange and wild and unseen magics, and make it feel a little more wonderful and wondrous after the players were coming out of Tomb of Annihilation. And so it makes sense for me for there to be this heightened access to magic. And so one of the things I did with that was creating not a shop per se where you can buy, where in this case this concierge spell services, but more of a service that guests at the hotel can pay for, guests at the doorkeeper's tower can pay for, where they can get healing and arcane spellcasting services available on call, but that they're more expensive. And then having some sort of having Grimble, who is a sort of a tinkerer kind of a spellcaster working out of, in my mind, effectively a shack on the outskirts of the port side Spelljammer Spires, who makes all sorts of outlandish claims about the quality of their services and sells their services at bargain basement rates, but that they sometimes have wild magic surges. And so again, another valuable difference, another two options here where there is a real choice and not just carbon copies of the same thing with different names. Um, the same, again, same sort of idea of making distinct options came down with entertainment, where we did the yard arm, a pugilist ring, versus the portside boardwalk, which is more of a which is frankly more of like a beach city boardwalk kind of thing, right? With fair-like stalls and games and that sort of deal. Now, specialists is kind of a catch-all group, and specialists are any service that really doesn't fit into the things above. Now, specialists were really easy in this area because I had already kind of built those out as part of the previous adventure. We had the Dragonman's Guild Hall, meaning we had this place where you could hire a guide from the Dragonman's Guild to serve as a guide through Sigil, which is a already densely populated and in some ways confusing place to navigate, as previously established in my adventure. Or you can purchase guide services for other parts of the multiverse. So when adventures take the characters far afield, maybe they want some help getting around wherever they're going, especially in unfamiliar places, and they can purchase that there. The Spelljammer port gives them contact with Spelljammers, allowing them to get out into wild space and other parts of the wild unknown and the astral sea. And then I incorporated a character from the previous adventure who was an information broker, a Mr. Shadow, who is a shady information broker, who's an Oblex, usually taking the form of a little gnomish gentleman. And he has offices throughout the city, but he maintains an office in the Nexus as well. And so, with just these few bullet points of information, again, a sentence or two for each of these, I now have really a very well fleshed out set of interaction points ready for the characters as they explore this district. And sure, this took a little time to brainstorm, but it doesn't take all that long. And it's not like you're having to build out all these different, all the buildings on every street or fully rendering each building and shop. You can certainly put that kind of time into it if you want, but then if the players don't go there, you kind of wasted that time. So just enough to give yourself a feel, just enough to give yourself what you need to improvise and play out that particular area of interaction, that particular touch point as the game gets going. So to add a little bit of that extra interactive flavor to it, I like to include scenic encounters in cities, and then I like to also create district encounters, which are encounters that are unique to a particular district. So we'll come back to the district encounters because it'll make more sense once we talk about the scenic encounters. So let's talk about them for a little bit. So scenic encounters are effectively a random encounter table. And let me show you what I've created previously. And So what I did is I really just made this random encounter table, but the encounters aren't combat encounters. Well, not for the most part. There's a little bit of that in here, but they're really focused on city life, things that the players, or then rather the characters, might see as they explore the city. And so, what I will do is, I will, as the characters travel around the city, I will roll for an encounter where I'll just roll 6 at a die, and on a 1, a scenic encounter occurs. These encounters can happen a lot more often because they're quick. They don't necessarily involve a lot of interaction. They're really just about atmosphere. And I'll narrate that encounter as the players, rather as the characters pass through the landmarks in the city. So for example, I have things like a lamplighter friar preaches the purity of the sacred flame on the street corner. 1d8 children race through the streets chasing a ball. A charlatan approaches the characters trying to sell them counterfeit potions. A street vendor argues with a guard. These are all little things that the characters could interact with if they want. They could go insert themselves in this argument and try to mediate it, or they could just pass on by, and most likely they'll just pass on by. This is just to give flavor to the city streets and make them feel like vibrant, living things without, instead of sort of these just barren avenues that lead them from point A to point B. We want them to feel like people live here and that there are things going on outside of the characters. So I create a list of 20, but what I like to do is make the last 6 district encounters. And so that way, whenever we travel anywhere, I roll, and I have to roll for an encounter, I just roll a 1d20. And if it's 1 through 14, then it's just one of the general encounters that kind of applies to all of Sigil. If it's 15 through 20, 1 through 14, it's one of the general encounters. If it's 15 through 20, then it's a district-specific encounter. And these give just a little extra unique flavor to the district that we're working on. So in this case, I just do the same kind of deal, but it's a 1d6 table instead of a 1d20, right? So, in this case, I felt that a couple combat encounters, or rather a combat encounter in this case, might be relevant. I could see, since this is a port, that we could have, a confrontation between some guards and some drunken spelljammer crewmen. And that doesn't have to be a fight that involves the characters. It could just be a fight between the two of them, or the characters might decide to get involved. Again, it gives us toys and tools to play with to set the scene and let our characters involve themselves or exclude themselves as they see fit as they explore the city. But the same kind of deal. So if I got a district encounter roll on the scenic, I would just roll an extra 1d6 and I would pull up one of these, or I'd pick one that just fit the situation. Whatever felt right at the moment. So again, I'll build out as many of these districts as I need to. For Sigil, I will build out, like I said, probably 8 or 10, probably closer to 10 of them, just because of the size of this place. And so I'll just repeat this process over and over and over again until I have everything that I need all in one source document, each with their own individual district encounters. It may feel like a lot of work, but it goes pretty quickly. And again, too, it's really nice because it's scalable. And so even if you're starting with, what starts as a town and eventually it grows over the course of the campaign, well then as it grows, you just roll up a new district, and that's the new building, the new construction that's expanding the town and turning it from a small backwater into a bustling port city over time. It gives you a cool mechanic to allow settlements to evolve and grow. Likewise, you can do the opposite. If something is kind of falling into decay over time, you start with all these districts, and eventually districts get kind of, quote unquote, abandoned or they get overtaken back by nature, or they turn into sort of these lawless places that the people of the town kind of avoid as they retreat deeper and deeper into the city. So it gives you a really useful set of tools. The last thing that you want to do once you have your districts kind of laid out is setting up what the major routes are. You don't need to know uh, all of the streets, every alleyway. You don't have to give them all names. In fact, it's way too confusing. Your players will not remember all of those names. They will get lost just as you recite. Oh, you took a left on Maple and then turned into Elm, and then it was up onto Sycamore, and then you went down the hill and over to LaCroix, and then it was, and it just, you get too many of those little details in there, and it all becomes just kind of a wash. So instead, we just want major thoroughfares. Now, because of Sigil's unusual shape, my roads and avenues take circular paths. And so I wrote them um, as longitudinal and latitudinal directions. So we have kind of these inner circles, and then we have the outer circle that comes around the longer part of the donut, I suppose, if you will. And with all these intersecting and maybe generally right angles, we'll see how I end up drawing them on the map eventually. But I went ahead and just created a few big ones that will give me a starting point and allow me to intersect and connect all of these major districts. And then I can just narrate them getting, players getting onto these major roads, following one, turning on the other, passing a landmark. And look at that. And then I'll have 3 points of description, and it's a much more effective montage, right? So to do that, again, I just looked at my map and broke it down into just a few logical segments. One started with longitudinal. Uh, and that's simply because it kind of jumped out at me that when you're looking at this map, the longest street in all of Sigil would be the one that runs around kind of the belt of this that goes all the way around on the inside and then comes back around in this direction. And having people just call that the long way made sense to me. It felt colloquial enough to make that its street name. And so I called that Long Way. And then with that middle point there, it felt like maybe there were two other major longitudinal roads, one above and one below, so Halo Ave and Scupper Street. And then I added the latitudinal, since these are shorter streets, even though they're still circular in nature. I put more of them in here. Specifically, I built out 8 of them, effectively one for each cardinal direction, north, east, southwest, and then one for each of the combined directions. So, northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest, right? And I can place them loosely around the map that way. Obviously, not making them rigid to the compass lines, but giving me some reasonable segments to deal with that I might add into later. We'll see. But really, I just went through and I gave these names that seemed like they made sense for where I'm thinking about having them run. So, for example, I've been toying around the idea of a district that has a high population of celestials and fiends living in there. And so I thought about, specifically I thought about warlocks, right? And about making pacts with celestials and fiends. And I thought, well, if it's, pact is binding, well, maybe this is called Binder's Way, is the road that runs through there. That might be silly. That might not work. Or, maybe I don't need to explain it to the characters. I just call it Binder's Way, and that's just what it is, and I let them make their own associations for it. But really, just going through here and giving these things names so that I have a reference point to put on the map, so that when I'm describing travel, the characters, or rather the players, understand where their characters are going and how they're getting there. And really, that's all there is to it. Uh, we're just building out a city district by district for as many districts as we need, with just a few key elements in there that we will layer on and build out as the campaign progresses, and then tossing in some variable elements in the form of these encounters and their connection points to give it a little bit of unexpected life. So when you're ready to start building your own towns and cities and home bases, try out this district model. I think you'll find that it makes building dynamic settlements really easy, and it gives your players a lot to work with. And it gives you a lot to role play with to make these settlements and these locations really come to life. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so that you never miss a video.